This provocation, it seems like every single day it ratchets up higher and higher. Iran pressing, pushing the envelope.
Qasem Soleimani, a former general in Iran's Revolutionary Guard and a commander of the Quds Force, has been killed in a rocket attack apparently initiated by the United States.
Iran has now been engaged for months and we're managed to dozens and dozens of attacks throughout the region.
The use of proxy fighters to destabilize its neighbors must end, and it must end now.
The risk of doing nothing was enormous.
I am ready and prepared to take whatever action is necessary, and that in particular refers to Iran.
By now you've heard about the grave danger the Iranian government poses to the United States and world peace, but do you know what makes it truly evil? Iran armed and supported one of the most notorious terror groups, then had the audacity to claim the United States was supporting them. Iran is so vicious and aggressive that its soldiers burn cities to the ground to spread their extremist ideology, killing women and children and rationalizing it with their hypocritical sense of moral superiority. Wherever Iran decides to bang its iron fist, more terror attacks are carried out. The Iranian military once shot down a civilian airliner, killing 290 people in a single attack. Iran is not only enriching its own uranium, but also turned a blind eye when one of its extremist allies helped a dictator establish nuclear capabilities, all the while grandstanding on its own righteousness. Domestically, Iranian law enforcement are armed to the teeth, and no violation is too small to warrant a death sentence. Supporters of the regime demand everyone else worship its authority and its pro-government symbols. The Iranian government forces its people to fund its rule, whether or not they agree with its policies. Iran has deployed its spies and spooks to sow unrest in other countries, helping topple democratically elected leaders and backing tyrants in order to expand its web of control. Iran imposes sanctions, an act of war, to bully other countries that won't submit to their power-hungry, violent ways, all the while claiming to care about the common people when they know that's exactly who suffers under sanctions. That makes it unsurprising that Iran has also unleashed chemical weapons and radioactive weapons on civilian populations. Iran's ruling class repeatedly manufactures lies about other governments in order to justify expanding its sphere of influence. Iran is the biggest supporter of terrorism in the world, spreading hateful, authoritarian fanaticism that leads to mass oppression, suffering, and death. Iran is run by dangerous, tyrannical maniacs, and America has to do something to end this scourge upon humanity. Oh, wait. It was the US government that armed and supported al-Qaeda on numerous occasions, then accused Iran of supporting them, even though the Shia sect of Islam is at odds with the Sunni sect al-Qaeda adheres to. It has been America that has destroyed cities and lives, slaughtering women and children while claiming to liberate them and spread freedom. In Middle Eastern countries the US bombs, terrorist activity spikes and gains a bigger foothold, like in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Libya. It was the American military that downed an Iranian civilian airliner in 1988, then claimed it was an accident. Iran may be enriching uranium, but the US has 6,185 nuclear warheads, second only to Russia. The US is the only country to ever bomb populous cities with them, and it turned a blind eye when Saudi Arabia gave Saddam Hussein billions of dollars to develop a nuclear program. Police in America are armed to the teeth and will assault or kill people for violations as small as jaywalking, minor shows of disrespect, or even when their victims are following orders. Victimless crimes land Americans behind bars, with people rotting in prison for drug possession while murderers, rapists, and child molesters walk free. It is millions of fanatic Americans who demand everyone worship the government's authority and symbols of nationalism, threatening violence against those who won't submit. In America, and almost everywhere else, people are forced to fund these injustices through taxation, even if they disagree. It's the US government that used white phosphorus in Iraq and condones Israel's use of the chemical, which the US explicitly defined as a chemical weapon in the 1990s, and the US also used depleted uranium in Iraq. It's not a secret that the CIA has made a habit of sowing unrest in other countries with the intention of putting puppets in power to benefit the interests of the US government and its corporate welfare leeches. It's the American government that imposes crippling sanctions on Iran, leaving regular people unable to engage in commerce and access vital foods and medicines. All the while, ex-CIA head turned Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spouts rhetoric about helping the Iranian people.
We're supporting the Iranian people.
The US has a long track record of bending the truth without providing evidence in order to justify military attacks. US ally Saudi Arabia is the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. Whether through its elaborate programs to spread Wahhabism, the extreme ideology underlying ISIS, or through its war crimes in Yemen, where the Saudi coalition bombs agriculture, hospitals, and school buses with US weapons. Even Donald Trump suggested the Saudis were behind 9/11.
But you will find out who really knocked down the World Trade Center, because they have papers in there that are very secret. You may find it's the Saudis.
Only to to become president and sign weapons contracts with them. The US runs a close second with its support for terrorism, whether its own political violence cloaked in the flag, the resentment that sows, or its actual policies to arm terrorists. Despite all these failures, schemes, and manipulations, people are still cheering for Trump's assassination of Iran's top general, and it's because the government and media have been sowing the lies and simplistic good guy, bad guy narrative for decades now. This warmongering propaganda is simply reality for millions of Americans. Before you scream that I hate America and support extremists, let me be clear that I don't back the Iranian regime, nor am I suggesting they're innocent of every claim I've listed here. Soleimani was a bad actor. The Iranian government silences protesters. They torture dissidents. They withhold due process, just like America's allies. The Iranian government is run by a bunch of power-hungry sociopaths, just like America and governments around the world. Except in Iran, the American government set the stage for the current situation by reinstalling an autocrat, which led to the Iranian Revolution and the current regime, which actually turned Iranians into refugees. So again, I don't support the Iranian government. And not wanting to waste trillions of dollars and countless human lives on another unwinnable regime change war doesn't mean I hate freedom. It means I distrust all governments and their high horse claims to care about humanity while they destroy it. If the US really cared about the well-being of the world population, it certainly wouldn't stay aligned with Saudi Arabia. It would condemn Israel's slaughter of Palestinians who throw rocks and religious zealots' use of violence to steal other people's property because their holy book told them it was theirs. Both countries have helped drive the growth of terrorism, if not directly backed it, so the argument that saber-rattling against Iran and calling for attacks against the country has anything to do with our safety is laughable. Maybe you're thinking about Iran violating the nuclear agreement, conveniently ignoring that the US left it first and Iran pledged to honor it anyway until just recently, when America started beating its war drum more loudly. Maybe you're mad about that drone Iran shot down or the ship your TV and politicians told you Iran attacked. Aside from the fact that US officials provided no credible evidence that Iran aggressed against that tanker, and rather pretty much said the government said so, believed the anonymous authorities, the drone downing speaks volumes. American keyboard warriors insisted it was an unforgivable act of aggression worthy of retaliation, triggered over an unmanned drone when for years the very same people have been funding and rationalizing drone attacks that failed to hit 90% of their targets, hit weddings and funerals and hospitals, and often circled back around to bomb first responders. Maybe you're cheering the death of the Iranian general because he was behind the attack on the US embassy. Aside from the fact that his militia was integral in beating back ISIS, there never would have been an attack on the US embassy in Iraq in the first place if they hadn't been conducting a failed, bloody war there for 17 years, helping create ISIS in the first place. In fact, considering America's track record with military intervention, even if governments did have the right to invade other sovereign nations, they don't, the US would still be the worst possible option to lead this effort. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen. I'm not saying these countries didn't already have problems on their own, but America's bombings and invasions have obliterated their homelands and destroyed human life, all without actually achieving the intended goal of stopping terrorism. Terror attacks in Iraq increased after the US invasion. ISIS grew directly because of US failures there, in addition to US allies propping them up. Al-Qaeda grew early on because the US just had to undermine the Soviets in Afghanistan by supporting the Mujahideen. The Taliban still controls the majority of land there after 18 years of war. You can't decry the violent aggression of one country when you're calling for it on behalf of your own. You can't claim to have the moral high ground when you rationalize war crimes and empire. In fact, if you truly love America and care about security, freedom, and American values, maybe you should attack your own government.